This week on Political Capital, after the shellacking, a victory lap. The president vacations, having secured major legislative wins. What does the census say about America? We asked the man behind the numbers, Census Bureau Director Robert Groves. And on the last word, gather round, Margaret and Kate are doling out Christmas gifts. We begin the show with Bloomberg News White House reporter Julianna Goldman and congressional reporter Lisa Lerer. Lisa, what a lame duck. We all thought it was going to be a debacle. Instead, it turned out to be incredibly productive. What happened?
Well, I think there are a lot of people on both sides of the aisle who are feeling very, very grateful this holiday season for all that got done. They passed a $858 billion tax bill. There was ratified the START treaty, repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell, food safety law. Am I forgetting anyone? Well, I mean, if you talk to Democrats, they'll say that Republicans, after the election, the political dynamics changed and Republicans realized that they now have power and they have to, with great power comes great responsibility, as Spider-Man would say. If you talk to Republicans, they say that they got the kinds of compromises that they need to see from the White House and from Democrats.
Well, let me pick up on that. You and Laura Litvan wrote the best piece about the historic 111th Congress. You really, really did. And the one thing that marked the lame duck was bipartisanship. Republicans had huge gains November 2. What was their incentive to compromise before their numbers were going to be so much bigger?
That's quite a compliment. Thank you. But I think Republicans did realize that their position had changed a little bit. And I also think that this was a little bit of an opportunity for Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell to allow some of the more moderate members of his caucus off the hook to vote for these provisions. Because he knows once this new crop of folks come in, a lot of them are much more ideologically conservative. And reaching those kinds of compromises is going to be, get a lot harder, I think, for him.
Julianna, did the White House really anticipate this kind of success?
Al, you think back to a month ago. The president had just come off of this midterm shellacking. He went to Asia. It started off great. And then at the end, it was he has no power on the world stage. Right. The president's power is diminished. And they came back. They were all, in somewhat of a bit of depression, not knowing sort of how this was all going to pan out, and START, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, repeal, all these had been declared dead at various points or on life support. So they are ecstatic at how this has turned out, but it also shows, and they've appreciated now, just how these life cycles in terms of the political spin, the Washington culture, how they last, and they realize and appreciate more that they really do need to kind of wait things out, take a bird's eye view on issues, and they think that in the next year when they have new blood in, other people leaving, that's going to help.
What did they do differently and who did it?
In some ways it was the circumstances. The clock was running out. They were as Lisa was talking about, they were forced, they had to come together. But the president probably gets a great deal of credit for example, START. This was an area where the loss would have been greater in some ways than the win. He had to get this done. Don't Ask, Don't Tell, repeal. You sort of saw him putting political chips on the table and going back to this sort of compromiser in chief that we hadn't really seen over the last 2 years.
Well, there was a lot of angst. Just 2 weeks ago, you talk about this short spin about Obama losing his base because they were so upset about the tax cut deal. With some of the victories the last few days, is that now dissipated?
Well, the Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal has helped bring the volume down. And in many ways, the president's press conference before he left for Hawaii was a way of reaching back out, trying to bring the progressives back in. But this is going to be a constant struggle, especially heading into 2012, where they really need to try and get the independent voters back in.
All right, to be an equal opportunity sycophant, you wrote the single best piece, Julianna Goldman, about Barack Obama the compromiser.
Well,
that all these people who were talking about Barack Obama's making these deals, and you've covered him now for over 3 years, and it didn't surprise you that he's a deal maker.
No, it's vintage Obama, and you look back at his history, whether it was Harvard, he was elected the first black president of the law review because he could build consensus, even as a candidate. Remember how he had said he was going to be part of the public finance system, then when it looked like he really needed to forego the matching funds. Even as president, remember he came in saying he was going to put C-SPAN, healthcare negotiations on C-SPAN, and then he struck that backroom deal with pharma. And he also was always talking about not letting perfect be the enemy of the good. And so he was saying some of the same lines over the last few weeks when he was talking about the tax cut deal that he was using as a candidate. So it really wasn't a big surprise, but because of the political situation over the last 2 years, that sort of compromising style was only half on display, and it's something that the White House, the president, would like to continue to keep on display over the next 2 years.
And we'll surely have to see some of it if the other side's willing to compromise.
When you look back 2 years ago, it's what the White House said. Oh, hey, we were always willing to compromise, but right from the very beginning, Republicans said, we're not going to let you get through any of your top legislative priorities. So they're sort of just waiting right now to see.
Lisa, I want to ask you just about a few figures in this lame duck. First, Richard Burr of North Carolina voted to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Big surprise.
Yeah, he actually voted against moving to ending debate on the measure, and then reversed his vote and voted for the measure itself. And, when asked about it by reporters afterwards, he said that it was, he knew this generational change was coming. It was clear there's a greater acceptance of homosexuality in society, and so, he wanted to vote with that trend.
He's surely right, but it really was interesting. And Scott Brown of Massachusetts, on a whole host of votes, seems to be lining up with the Maine twins, Collins and Snow.
That's exactly right. Scott Brown was the Tea Party darling. You remember he was the first Republican to win, and what we now know became this huge wave. And now he's basically a pretty moderate Republican, and that's because he wants to win. Now that he's in, he wants to stay in the Senate, and he's from one of the bluest states in the country. So that involves you can't be a Tea Party ideologically conservative Republican and win in Massachusetts, and he knows it.
Lisa, I want to ask you one question about the census report, which I always find fascinating. We're going to have the Census Director, Robert Groves, on in just a minute. But it looked like it was good news for Republicans in general, with the redistricting and the like, but also Latinos are going to gain strength.
Right. The census is sort of like a early Christmas for political nerds like all of us at this table, I think. But it did, at first blush, it looked like it's awfully good news for Republicans. The states that gained numbers were typically red states like Texas and Arizona. The states that lost were places like the Rust Belt and New York. But I'm not so sure. It really depends how they draw the lines, because where those gains were, as you pointed out, in the minority community. So it places extra emphasis on Republicans making inroads to the Latino community, and that's been going to be pretty tough for them, considering how they voted on the DREAM Act, which of course would have expanded citizenship rights for young illegal immigrants, and how the party tends to talk when the immigration issue comes up.
Speaking of the DREAM Act, Obama said that was his great disappointment. Is he really going to push hard for it in the next Congress with so many more Republicans?
Yes, he is. And just getting back to the census, whether it was coincidental or not, the day the census came out, the president met with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus in the Oval Office and pledged immigration reform next year. So at the president's press conference, he gave such an impassioned response to the DREAM Act, and he basically said, this is going to fall on me. I'm going to go out, I'm going to have to sell this to the American people so that we can turn political attitudes on this, because once the American people sort of understand what's at stake here, why this is so important, then members of Congress are going to see it that way too.
Okay, thank you both, and a happy holiday to the two of you. And when we come back, we'll talk with that Census Bureau Director, Robert Groves.
People respond.
Welcome back. We're joined now by Dr. Robert Groves, the head of the Census Bureau. Thank you very much, Dr. Groves.
Great to be here.
Your centennial census shows population growth of only 9.7%, which I think is the slowest since the 1940 census.
Right.
Why?
Well, it's a long-term trend, first of all. If you took out the Depression decade and the baby boom decade, we have a steady decline in the rate of growth. Why is that happening? Well, it turns out it's happening in most developed societies around the world.
Right.
It has to do with lower fertility rates, first of all. All of these societies are getting in migrants. Immigrants are coming in, but the net effect is a slowing of the growth.
You released the macro numbers. I'm a Census Bureau junkie, or census junkie. You're going to have a lot more data that comes out. What more are you going to be telling us in the months ahead?
Oh, this is just the beginning. Coming in February and through the end of March will be state by state, very fine-grained detailed data, down to the block level. We'll have population counts broken out by race and ethnicity. Those are the tools that every state will use for redistricting, which is a massive operation that will take place over the coming months.
And what will the business community look to? What will be of value to the business community as
the business community can really profit from this small geographical detail, and we have some tools that are new, software tools that allow a businessman, a small businessman especially, to assemble data for the market area he or she is interested in attacking, to make good decisions about what the market looks like. So we think our tools and the data will serve business.
And they can just go to the Census Bureau website to use those tools.
That's right. We call it the American Fact Finder, and you can jump in there, really user-friendly kind of stuff.
Yeah. You've got a very good response rate. You came in under budget. That makes you a very unique government agency. Government studies in the past have shown that subsequent to the 2000 census that it missed about 4 million people. I think the 90 census may have missed as many as 8 million people, largely in minority and immigrant communities. Did you get it right this time?
We don't know yet. No census is perfect. That's the first thing to note. There's never been a perfect one. The second thing to note is it takes a while to evaluate this, and there are 3 ways we evaluate a census. One is we look at process indicators, performance indicators during data collection. 2, we compare the census results to estimates from vital registration, birth and death certificates. And 3, we have a large sample survey to measure the undercount. We're starting to get glimmers on the first 2. The process indicators look really good this time. The operations went smoothly. People responded at a rate beyond our expectations. The second indicator we're starting to get signals on. We released on December 6th a range of population estimates based on different assumptions of immigration. The census comes sort of dead center on that range.
So that's encouraging.
That's a good sign for us.
So do you think you may have come in less than, with an undercount of less than
we'll see.
4 million?
I'm a data geek.
Are you optimistic?
I am optimistic. So far so good, but stay tuned.
You have better tools, you have better sampling tools, you have more technology, better research. Does that help you?
Design changes we made this time, and I had nothing to do with it. I'm a newbie here. Were really good. It reduced the variation in response over geographical space. The areas that are traditionally hard to enumerate did better, so the variation in response is smaller. That's a good property of a census.
One thing we know is that Hispanics are the fastest growing ethnic group in America. Are there going to be any surprises here, you think, as we evolve in this? And not so much the numbers, but the geography, anything else about the Hispanic population?
Yeah, I think we've documented well through the American Community Survey, this large sample survey we have about the growth of the Hispanic population. The fine-grained geographical detail of the census will do another thing, and that will tell us about geographical dispersion. And all of the speculation is that we'll be taught something about our society, and that is new ethnic groups are going all over the country.
It's not just New Mexico or Arizona.
That's right,
Southwest.
and it's not just the coasts, and it's not just urban areas. You know, our mindset of what immigration looks like is a coastal phenomenon, big cities.
Right.
Doesn't look that way now, and there are small villages with new immigrant groups in it.
You know, young people in America today are much less race conscious. They're more Americans of mixed race. Are you going to have to change the way you report on and categorize race and ethnicity in your census?
That's another thing I can't wait to see. All of us should look at this when it's out, and this will be the February to March vintage data. Remember that in the year 2000, for the first time, we could check multiple races.
Right.
Turned out very few people did that. But also, think back over this decade. This is the decade of Tiger Woods and Barack Obama. We've talked about race combinations, and I can't wait to see the pattern of responses on multiple races. That'll be a neat indicator to
That'll
watch.
really be interesting considering. The headlines that came out from the census, understandably, of this part of the census, was who wins and who loses House seats. But it is a rather familiar story. The Sun Belt expands, the Rust Belt contracts. There's no reason to think this isn't going to be a continuum, is there?
Well, first of all, on the political side, I must remind people that the Census Bureau is a nonpartisan agency. We supply the data for this political purpose. Now, that big trend is a massive multi-decade trend from the Northeast and the Midwest growing at smaller rates than the South and the West. This is the first decade, I point out, that the Western region is larger than the Midwest region. The West region, these states that came last into the Union, sparsely settled, that's filling up in a way that we've never seen before. Will that continue? Well, you have to diagnose the reasons why it's happening now, and there's a complex set of reasons. We'll see what happens.
Okay, Dr. Gross, thank you very much for being with us. And when we return, we'll see what's under Margaret Carlson and Cato Burns' Christmas tree. That was terrific. Welcome back. We'll go to Margaret Carlson and Cato Burns in just a moment. But first, Middle East peace remains elusive despite the Obama administration's efforts. Gwen Ackerman, Bloomberg's Deputy Bureau Chief in Israel, joins us now to talk about the road ahead. Gwen, in the holy season in the Holy Land, any reason for optimism?
Optimism is not a word being bandied about these days about Middle East peace talks, Al. And in general, the talks stalled in September, and they don't seem to be appearing to be about to be resumed anytime soon. The Palestinians have voiced a lot of frustration with the process, and they are starting to look for recognition of their state from blocks of countries. They're asking for international, the community, the UN, the European Union to take a more active role in the process. So no, optimism is not really in the cards right now.
What happened to that raging controversy over the Israeli settlements?
That controversy a bit fizzled out, primarily because the United States decided to let it fizzle. Earlier this month, the United States said it's no longer on the table, and instead they're sending George Mitchell to the region to speak to Israel by itself, to speak to the Palestinians by themselves, to work out with the sides their opening positions in an attempt to get the talks to start sometime in the near future.
What's happening with Hamas and the Gaza Strip?
Well, we've seen an escalation of violence quite recently this week, in fact, between Israel and the Gaza Strip. More rockets coming across at Israel, more airstrikes on Gaza. Analysts say that this is an attempt by Hamas to keep itself on the world agenda. It was used to being high up there following the raid on the aid flotilla in May. And now Israel's easing the embargo. Gaza's not really in the spotlight anymore, and they're using the rocket attacks to try to say we're still here. Nobody really expects this low-scale escalation to accelerate into something larger.
Okay, Gwen Ackerman, happy holidays to you. Thank you, and we're going to be coming back to you a lot in 2011. Let me turn now to our two favorite jolly elves, Kate and Margaret, whose Yuletide generosity has always been one of their hallmarks. And in the spirit of the holiday, I know you both believe it is better to give than to receive. So what are you going to give, Margaret, to Barack Obama this year?
I'm going to give him an inscribed copy of the late, great Richard Holbrooke's memoir in honor of Obama's negotiating skills in this lame duck session. All he had to do was give up tax cuts for which the Republican Party stands to the wealthy who don't need it in exchange for everything else he got.
Kate.
You know, it wasn't really the holiday spirit, was it, Al? I missed that one, Margaret.
I like to receive,
Some
actually.
of the president's critics find him too restrained,
right,
too inhibited. I would give him a tear duct from John Boehner. So between the two of them, they'd strike an emotional balance.
Oh, boy, don't cry for me, John Boehner. What are you going to give John Boehner, by the way?
John Boehner, I'm going to give a visit from the ghost of Christmas past, Christmas 1994, to remind John Boehner of some of the mistakes made during the last Republican revolution.
That would be a very helpful. My guess is he's probably begun to bone up on that a little bit anyway, but that gift will help. Margaret, what are you going to give
Well,
Speaker
I hope
to be?
this passes Kate's generosity standard. I'm going to give John Boehner a gift certificate to Smoke Enders. When you look at the balcony outside the Speaker's office, and he always has a cigarette dangling from his lips, it's not at all dignified. And I'm going to give him one with Obama, because he could slip back and they could bond over pictures of black lung disease.
Oh, Margaret.
It's not the
Margaret,
spirit, is it?
how about all these Tea Party Republicans will be arriving in town in about 10 days? Now, you must have a nice gift for them.
I'm afraid that they might succumb to earmarks and lobbyists. They better resign with that. So I'm going to give them a tea kettle, because all they've done so far is blow off steam.
Oh, she's tough to this Christmas, isn't she, Kate?
Al, I am going to give the incoming Tea Party members something they might not want, but something they're going to need. I'm going to give them patience and remind them Rome was not burnt in a day. It's going to take a while.
Oh, Cato Byrne, stateswoman. Let me ask you about Sarah Palin. You got anything for her?
I have a gift for the Republican field that's going to make me very popular with Republicans. But for a pesky detail, there would be a consensus frontrunner.
Right.
So I'm going to give a change of name to Jeb Bush.
Oh,
Make me very popular.
Interesting. Jeb Woodward or something like that.
Now,
Carlson.
this is a sweet gift. I'm going to give Sarah Palin's rivals a DVD of Sarah Palin's Alaska. Take a lesson from the caribou, who look suspiciously like Santa's reindeers, and do not get in her line of fire.
She's a good shot.
Boy. I'll tell you something. All of her rivals would love to have that kind of
camouflage.
Yes.
Right. Camouflage.
Hey, somehow Mitch Daniels, Indiana. I just find that hard to believe. Well, listen, a Merry Christmas to both of you,
Al.
and thank
Merry
you.
Christmas.
And a Merry Christmas to all of you out there watching, and we hope you'll join us again next week.
Political Capital is a production of Bloomberg Television.
All next week, there are events that rock the business world and beyond in 2010. And they're all far from over. Street Smart wraps up 2010 and reveals what's ahead in 2011. All next week on Bloomberg Television.